Praise God, thank you. Now, as is unfortunately typical of me, I suddenly caught out of the side of my ear the name Alan, and I said to myself, he's introducing me. I have to get up and speak. But what I was doing was actually part of what I hope will be my message for you today. Now, I often have to tell my audiences that you need for a moment to kind of brace yourself, because wherever you are or think you are, in terms of our politics and what you desire, some of the things that I'm about to say to you will make you uncomfortable, I think. But I will say them because, contrary to what some people believe, I don't believe that it's possible to be truly optimistic about a situation you're not willing to look at. It's sort of like being optimistic about the outcome of an operation when a doctor hasn't been given a chance to diagnose the problem. Can't tell whether you need a heart surgery or a liver transplant, and you're going to be optimistic about the outcome of the operation. I'd rather have a doctor who knew what the problem was. Because if he knows what the problem is, maybe there's some chance that he'll do the right thing in order to deal with the problem. But if he's lying about the problem, then you're lying to yourself if you're optimistic about the solution. And I sadly believe that that is the truth about the situation of our country, of our liberty, and of our Constitution today. We are unfortunately confronted with what I believe is the worst situation for liberty in the history of our nation. I believe that in more ways than we are many times willing to admit, our liberty has already been destroyed, violated, trampled upon, and discarded. And I deeply believe that whatever we are being told by those who are the agents of the present partisan system for politics, they tell us what is in their interest. They tell us what serves the purposes of the money powers and the corporate powers and the media powers that create them. They are no longer sharing with us anything that has to do with our good and with our better future and better destiny as a people. And that means that we need to look at some of these things for ourselves and to look clearly, closely, carefully at the truth of them. And I want to begin today by taking perhaps as a standard and guide for my little discussion some of the things that were shared with us by the founding fathers of our country. In particular, I remember that as part of his legacy, in the last formal speech he gave, or statement he released as President of the United States, his famous farewell address, George Washington actually counseled the nation against the politics of party. And he wasn't talking about this party or that party, the Republican Party, the Democrat Party, all of this. He was talking about what he called the spirit of party itself. And he said that that spirit of party would inevitably lead to a situation in which people were first pandered to, told by leaders what they wanted to hear, promised anything that folks thought they wanted to have, and that by means of those promises, the factions, he called them, that is, groups and associations of people working together in their own interest and against the common interest and the common good of the people in the country, that these factions would then gather power into their own hands. And when it had been sufficiently gathered, they would then set up a demagogue who would represent that unbridled, unlimited, unconstitutional concentration of power. And they would turn our country from a free republic into a tyranny. Turn us from a free people into the subjects of a tyrant demagogue and tyrant class and tyrant elite, pushing us back to the very same status that had been the bane of humankind in every country, in every climate, in every era of the world until America was founded. What I want to say to you today is that some people would say, well, we've had all these parties and Washington was wrong, and I want you to look at your situation. And I want you to tell me that we are not right now faced with so-called parties who represent an association of people who are gathering power into their hands in their own interest, that they are robbing our public treasury in their own interest, that they are distributing the results to their own cronies without any regard for our interest, for our future, for our posterity. I believe that what Washington predicted is exactly what we have. Our parties have adopted the politics of demagoguery and pandering and used that politics in order to despoil us of our income and finally of our free institutions. And I think, y'all, that this is not an outcome that is coming. We are in the midst of it. And I deeply believe that the 2012 election could mark that period at the end of the American sentence in which the great project and experiment in government of, by, and for the people comes to an end. And believe me, you shouldn't fool yourself into thinking, oh, Alan, the elections will go on. If we're going to have elections that have the same integrity, the same fairness, the same true reflection of the people that we have been seeing during this primary season, then excuse me, those are no elections at all. We might as well be living in the Soviet Union if we take that fraud as the choice of the people. And it was a fraud perpetrated, I think, pretty openly. I pity some of the folks who are on the Republican side who haven't yet gone to the polls to vote in the primary process, because it looks as if they've been disenfranchised. But you want to know the truth, y'all? I think we've all been disenfranchised. I think we've been disenfranchised because in addition to forgetting the wisdom of Washington, we have actually forgotten the wisdom of another great founder, shared by many of them, who, when they looked at the history of democracies, this is a word that the elitists now like to use a lot to try to herd people toward their side. We're Democrats, we're for democracy. You do realize that our founders looked at the record of democracies in the history of the world, and they saw that with almost no exception, every single one of them had failed. They had ended up in anarchy and disorder and civil conflict and ruin for their countries. And our founders looked at that example and they said, wait a minute, we believe in government that is based upon the unalienable rights of the people, but we don't want it to turn out that way. And so they didn't establish direct democracy. They based our country on the principle of representation, so that the people would govern through their chosen representatives. Is that what happens today? See, because I remember, I'll go through practical example, my own life, people approaching me in 2008, and a lot of people were persuading me that I had to vote for John McCain because you didn't want bad old nasty Obama to come in. Now, here they're talking to a guy. If I knew bad old nasty Obama, I would not only knew him, I was calling him by his right names long before any of these people. I was being honest with the people of this country about his dyed-in-the-wool, pro-baby killing, infanticide record. I was being honest about his background of indoctrination in the Marxist-Leninist communist approach to government. I was being honest about the truth of his record in politics and organizing at the community level, where he implemented the programs and projects and ideas of Gramsci and Saul Alinsky and other well-known communist philosophers and theorists and practitioners. And I had to put up with leaders in the Republican Party telling me that I was being extreme, and he was so moderate in his speech, and I'm trying to look at them and make the simple point. I'm not going to tell people lies. I'm going to tell them the truth based on the record of information I have in front of me. And that's what I did. See? But they were quite willing to let him pass votes. And there these same people come, or some of them, and say, we ought to vote for McCain, got to keep Obama out. Did you know he's a communist? And I said, whoa. Fine time for you to be waking up. But what is the choice they were offering? I went down the list and I saw that John McCain had been good at one time. And then on every issue of importance to me, and I think most of the grassroots, he went as bad as you can get. Pro-life, issues like this, the border security and immigration, constraints and restraint in the budget process, even nomination and processes on judges and stuff. Not good, bad. And when they finally said to me, you got to go and tell your folks they have no choice but to vote for John McCain, I said to them, well, wait a minute. I know Obama's bad. But you know what was my conviction then? It's my conviction now. That once the people of this country found out, past the lies and the misrepresentation of the media, past the cowardly reluctance and silence of the so-called Republicans, when they finally found out from his words and from his deeds and from his actions who exactly he was, I used to tell people that once the American people found out who Barack Obama was, they'd have only one desire, and that would be to vomit him up, to vomit him out, and to make sure he would have no lasting effect on the destiny of our country. And that's where we are. So far from killing America, what he has done is rouse the American people in defense of the simple truth. We will say yes to our liberty, yes to the Constitution, but no to socialism and every demagogic tyrant who offers it to us. But here's my tragedy now. And it ought to be a tragedy for all of you, but it's a natural result of accepting what I was asked to do and refused to do in 2008. Everybody said, but Alan, you got to vote for the lesser of evils. We know, and they did too, all these leaders I talked to, they knew that John McCain wasn't good. They knew he didn't represent their people and what they wanted. But he said, we got to back him because he's the lesser of evils. And I said then, I wrote in an article called In Good Conscience, which is up on WorldNet Daily and my blog, in which I pointed out the problem with voting for the lesser of evils, y'all. There's one that's very pithy. The problem with voting for the lesser evil is that when the smoke clears, you're still being ruled by evil. You do understand that, right? The lesser of evils is evil still. The other problem with it is worse than that. The problem with voting for the lesser evils is that you then hand the standard for your vote to the evil side. And if they want you to get really evil, they will simply find and put up the most obvious and apparent and deep-dyed wickedness they can contrive. And when you vote for the lesser of evil, you'll be voting for just about the most deep-dyed wickedness you can find, but it'll be the lesser evil. Here's what I warn you all, especially those of you who believe as our founders did in the Creator God and His laws of nature that He put to govern us and the universe. The one thing you can be certain of, if you have no choice but evil, is that you have left the kingdom of God. You are not in Kansas anymore. When your only choice for rulership is Satan and Beelzebub, you better wake up and smell the sulfur, because you know where you are. Now you tell me, how many more times are you going to accept it? How many times are you going to take the next step and the next step and the next step deeper into that kingdom where evil rules and you are no longer represented? The problem with voting for choices that don't represent you is that it doesn't take long before you get a government that doesn't represent you. And that's what you have now. And we know it too. That's why the Congress, for all its Republican majority in the House, gets, what, less than 30% approval in these so-called polls. It's because people are not that stupid that they don't see that they wanted a ceiling on the indebtedness of this country so we would stop betraying and impoverishing future generations, and instead we got more of the same. They wanted controls on the spending so that there would be discipline reintroduced, so we would not put enslaving debt deeper and deeper onto the backs of our children and our grandchildren. And instead, we've gotten more of the same. For all the effort that was made in 2010, for all the folks that were elected, you show me one area. Did it stop them from passing a National Defense Authorization Act that leaves every citizen in this country prey to arrest in the dark of the night, without explanation, without warrant, without courts, without judges, to be put away and never heard from again? Did it stop them? No, it did not. Did it stop them from handing to the Barack Obama that the Republican leadership claims to dislike and claims to believe is so dangerous? Did it stop them from handing him the power to raise the debt ceiling at will? No, it didn't stop them. Now, I'll be honest with you. That power of arresting folks without due process of law, under the excuse that they have acted like or spoken like or done like some association with terrorism. You do know that under this administration, as I recall, they have sent communications out to the police at the state and local level in which they have included in their list of people who should be regarded as potential terrorists and terrorist associates, returning veterans, homeschoolers, Second Amendment rights supporters. So I would ask those of you who think that that Constitution ought to be respected, that when you stand up and say so, these folks will now identify you as somebody who believes in or associates with terrorists. And they will point to NDAA and say, you can be locked up in the middle of the night by the military and never heard from again if you don't shut up. I think that's a chilling effect on free speech, don't you? Okay. Now, these are the folks, by the way, the folks who passed us in a big bipartisan majority. These include the folks who came to the Congress as a result of Tea Party action and activity. 2/3 of them ended up with their arms twisted up practically out of their sockets by a corrupt Republican leadership that ended up persuading and forcing them to vote in a way that contradicted and betrayed the constituents who elected them. But if you keep voting for choices that don't represent you, you get a party system that doesn't represent you. You get a government weighted in the favor of leadership that doesn't represent you. When will it end? And people keep telling me, no, we got to do this, we got to stay within these bounds, and I'm telling you straight. We need to return to the wisdom of our founders. George Washington thought that the people of this country would be able to act and choose and govern themselves without factions and parties and the corrupt associations of selfish interest that they have become. And you know what I think? I think that the activities and the movement and the courage and the heart of Tea Party people at the grassroots has proven that Washington knows what he's talking about. We have finally come to the crisis. No leader will rescue us. No party will rescue us. The only thing that can save this nation now is the people themselves, encouraged by their faith in God and unwilling to give up the courage that that faith brings. But here's the simple question. How do we do this? I want to take a few minutes and explain to you in outline, because you can go on my blog, AlanKeyes.com. Have to spell it right, AlanKeyes, AlanKeyes.com, or Loyal to Liberty, Loyal T-O Liberty, to Liberty.com. Gets to the same place, which is my blog. In the last week or so, I have written a series of articles, starting with the wisdom of George Washington and talking about Madison's view of representation, and trying to acquaint people again with the truth. They keep telling us that when we go to vote, we are choosing our leaders. And I keep trying to tell people, wait, whenever everybody says that, when you hear it on TV and everything, translate the word leader into German, and you will understand what's really going on. What's the German word for leader? What is it? Führer. Now, how would you like that? we have a whole bunch of people telling us that the purpose of our elections is to choose our Führers. The purpose of our presidential election is to choose our Führer. Does that sound good to you? See, when you translate it that way, you realize that they're saying something that is un-American, that has nothing whatsoever to do with the people we are supposed to be. Do you know why? Because of that principle of representation. Think about it for 1 second. If you send somebody out to represent you, when that person comes to act, who are they supposed to act like? And when that person comes to speak and say a word to a gathering, who are they supposed to speak like? And when that person comes to vote on legislation or on action, who are they supposed to vote like? Now, let's see. If I'm looking to somebody else and doing what they example, what they pattern, what they say, who's the leader in that relationship? The people are in the lead. The people are the leaders here. We don't go to the polls to elect leaders. We go to the polls to elect people who will follow our lead. But not in the minds of the party potentates, not in the minds of those who have imposed upon us this corrupt system that now serves the interest of a little elite clique and that seeks to impose upon us their loss of faith in God, their loss of belief in the natural rights of family, their abandonment of the Constitution, their abandonment of the simple, self-evident truths that were shared in our Declaration. That's the problem we have now. Our parties are in the hands of elitist factions. It's literally the case. You know, people were asking me about Newt Gingrich during the campaign, and I kept inviting folks who asked me to go and notice that he had written a foreword to a book by a guy named Alvin Toffler. And that in this book, Toffler had outlined an internationalist scheme of government that was based upon the top elites and the sub-elites and the sub-sub-elites and how they were going to rule and control countries. Okay? I hate to remind you of this, but elitism is not republicanism. Elitism has nothing to do with the constitutional republic, the government of, by, and for the people, that the founder of the Republican Party so eloquently and rightly observed to be the last best hope of humankind. Our destiny is to be that people represented in government, not people who are ruled over by wise and benevolent and quality leaders who know better than we do that we should have families based on homosexuality, that we should have hospitals that practice the murder of our unborn children, and that we have schools that teach us that right is the unbridled freedom to have what we want and do what we please. This is not going to maintain self-government, because the root of self-government is just that, governing yourself, starting with your own heart, starting with your response to those God-given obligations to care for children and family and community. Do you know why they're called rights? Because they belong to the people who do what is right. And when you're doing what is right according to the laws of nature and nature's God, when you act according to that standard of right, which is the standard of the one who is the ruler and will be the judge of the universe, then you have the right to do what he commands you to do. Then you have the right to respond to that responsibility he has imposed upon you. Rights are not about doing what we please. They are about doing what pleases the standard of the Creator God who made us all. Our founders understood this. I think most of the people in our country, the grassroots bedrock folks who are doing their duties, they are trying to raise their children. They're trying to have decent families. They're trying to have the livelihood that will allow them to play a decent role in their community, to raise up new generations that will be the kind of citizens that will maintain the liberty and strength of this country. I know and I believe that a great majority of the American people represent that kind of commitment to decency and to write, but they are no longer represented in our politics, no longer represented in our government. Instead, things that contradict the very heart of their decency are being imposed upon us by law, used to silence the preachers in our pulpits, and used to demand that even those we send in defense of our country shall be indoctrinated in their doctrines of wrong. Can we ever end this? Well, see, I think we've already been practicing. And in fact, this gathering here today is an example of that practice. Washington wasn't a fool. In fact, without his support, the Constitution would never have been adopted. He was that strongly influential. He must have had some idea of what was in it, don't you think? And do you realize that according to what the Constitution says, the election of President of the United States doesn't occur on November 6th. When you go to the polls on November 6th, you will not elect the President of the United States. According to the Constitution of the United States, that election takes place when the Electoral College members are gathered in their respective state capitals and cast their vote for those offices. Who are these electors? Well, they're supposed to be the representatives of people at the grassroots who choose them. That's what they're supposed to be. You and I know what they really are now. They are the carefully chosen rewardees, people being rewarded for their support of the party bosses and the party structure. They represent the powers who have usurped the choices of the American people, who are pre-selecting the slates and predetermining the outcomes of our elections, and then handing the sham over to the American people, like the sham elections in the Soviet Union, to be rubber stamped by an electorate that is no longer represented by the choices they have foisted off on us. And I know some of you will be upset with me for this, but don't even whisper the name of Mitt Romney trying to tell me that that isn't what I'm talking about, because it is. I know his record. I know his imposition of gay marriage unilaterally by executive order and authority on the people of Massachusetts. I know his willingness to subvert the separation of powers explicitly outlined in the Massachusetts Constitution, so there could be no doubt that no opinion of any court had the force of law. When his supporters say he had to do what the court said, I say he had to do what the Constitution said. And what is even worse than the promotion of gay marriage, my opinion, though that's bad enough, was the promotion of the view that the executive must kowtow to the courts even when the courts violate the Constitution. Is that true? How can it be possibly true? Because then the judges would be higher than the Constitution and we wouldn't have constitutional government anymore. See? They say they're giving you a choice. Last time I looked, Barack Obama was the abuser of executive orders, but Mitt Romney showed him the lead. The last time I looked, Barack Obama was pushing for socialist health care, and he wanted to include government-funded abortion and individual mandates that violate our constitutional rights of property. And people are trying to tell me, but Mitt Romney, he's the alternative. And I'm saying, yeah, he's the alternative because he's already done what Obama's only trying to do. He's already imposed socialist health care in Massachusetts. He's already had a health program that included $50 co-pay abortions, that included individual mandates, all the things we fight against. He's already done. And now he goes around the country saying, but that was just for Massachusetts. I wouldn't want to do that to the country. Not the way he was talking in 2007, 2008, when he went around this country pointing to his health care as a model for the nation. How often shall we be lied to by the media, by the candidates, by the parties, before we wake up and realize we won't take back the choice until we are making the choices? And how can we do that? One simple word, 2 words, the Electoral College. I want you to go to my website, read the articles I posted there. The Electoral College, as it is now elected, would be a college where, if people put their mind to it, especially those who have been practicing and training in the Tea Party effort, put your mind not to electing a president, but to electing the electors who will choose the next president. To electing only people who will vote as you would vote, act as you would act. Not people who are controlled by the money, not people who are controlled by the media, but people who are controlled by the hearts and the will of the decent-minded folks who have banded together to save America. If there is a way to put slates of electors like that on the ballot and elect that majority to the Electoral College, then the world would awaken on November 7th to a breathtaking truth. That after all this effort to take away the Constitution and take away the liberty of our people, the people of America, having practiced in the Tea Party movement, had applied what they learned to take back the most important choice in their nation's life, and had given that opportunity for choice only to people who represented their heart for the Constitution, for the Declaration, for the restoration of fiscal sanity and moral decency in our country. And in that moment, we will have ended the danger that government of, by, and for the people will be overthrown. We will have reasserted the truth that the people of this country are still in control of its destiny. And you know what makes me even more hopeful? Think of all the technology that we now have at our disposal to gather together, to encourage one another in a massive movement that can now span the country in an instant if we have the will to organize it. Doesn't need money, doesn't need all the backing of these and those powers. It needs only the initiative and heart of people just like you. My counsel to you is to take that initiative, to stand forward and retake the choice so that we can begin after 2012, not to lament the end of the American Republic, but to lament the new beginning that came not because of some saving candidate, not because of some saving leader, but because of the saving grace of a God that had inspired the heart of a people to stand forward and be the leaders of their country again, so that they could continue to live as the free people of that country, handing that liberty to their children and to their grandchildren as long as God intends. God bless you.